Good afternoon and welcome to this Friday edition of Newsmax Now.
Miranda Khan, John Bachman, thanks for being with us here today. A scandal is rocking the 19 kids and counting family, the Duggars. The oldest son was investigated for molesting children, little girls, a long time ago. We'll have more on that story in a moment. But first, an arrest in the brutal murders of a family and their housekeeper in Washington, D.C. The man wanted for those four murders, 34-year-old Darren Wint, is now in custody. He was tracked down about 11 o'clock last night by a fugitive task force. It was apparently with a group of people traveling in a pair of cars, and they were caught in northeastern Washington, D.C.
We got to a situation where we could successfully take them down, and we did our standard practiced vehicle pin maneuver, and we were able to safely pin the vehicles, both vehicles, and place them under arrest.
Good work by police there. They say they narrowly missed Wint in Brooklyn, New York, where he was on Wednesday night. He is accused of killing Savas Savopoulos, his wife Amy, and their son Philip, and the family's housekeeper. Wint's been linked to a crime in the past and to this crime specifically through DNA found on pizza crust at the scene.
Now back to that story that John just mentioned, scandal and the Duggar family. Josh Duggar, the oldest of the 19 Duggar children, has now resigned from the Family Research Council. The decision comes after he admitted to being investigated for molesting teenage girls. 12 years ago, when Josh was 15, his father contacted police. Josh had admitted fondling at least 5 young girls, and some of his victims may have been his sisters. Josh has now apologized in a Facebook post.
We'll have more coming up in a Facebook debate taking place on Newsmax's Facebook page in a few moments. But first, all 6 Baltimore police officers arrested in the death of Freddie Gray have now been indicted by a grand jury.
As our investigation has continued, additional information has been discovered, and as is often the case, during an ongoing investigation, charges can and should be revised based upon the evidence.
That right there, Marilyn Mosby. Those charges against all 6 are similar to those initially filed by Baltimore State Attorney, who you just heard from. The most serious is against Caesar Goodson Jr., charged with second-degree depraved heart murder. He was the driver of that police van when Freddie Gray's neck was broken last month.
The ban on gay adults serving in the Boy Scouts may come to an end.
We must deal with the world as it is, not as we might wish it would be. The status quo in our movement's membership standards cannot be sustained.
That was Robert Gates making a statement to the Scouts National Meeting in Atlanta. No change is being made yet, but Gates says court fights over gay marriage could open the door to lawsuits affecting the Scouts, and the Boy Scouts New York City chapter recently struck out on its own, defying the ban and hiring openly gay adults as camp leaders. Ireland could become the first country to legalize gay marriage today by public vote. Stronger than normal turnout is being reported at polling places all across the country. People on both sides of the issue began lining up before the polls even opened at 7 o'clock this morning.
Our youth are gone. You know, they've no respect for anything now. They have to be turned around.
Oh, it's fantastic, getting great support from the passers-by. I think we're going to win. It looks very positive.
And he may actually win that right. Polls have shown the measure should have enough votes to win. Results will be announced tomorrow.
Health insurance rates around the country could be put on the fast track because of Obamacare. Some insurance companies are already asking regulators in several states for increases of up to 50% or more on plans sold through Obamacare exchanges. They say high medical costs for a relatively small number of ill enrollees or sick senior citizens are driving up costs.
One day left for the Senate to do something about the expiring parts of the Patriot Act. Senators are expected to act today on a bill that would end the NSA's bulk collection of phone records and replace it with case-by-case searches. That bill was already passed by the House, which has left for Memorial Day break, but it isn't clear if the votes are there to actually pass it, which leaves open the possibility that NSA will completely lose those surveillance tools.
Well, the wrangling over the Patriot Act continues, but Congress is already getting a pretty terrible report card. Less than a quarter of all Americans think the GOP is keeping the promises it made during the 2014 campaign, and just 4% say Congress accomplished more than they expected.
California farmers hope they can reach a deal on water. A group of farmers along the delta of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers have offered to cut back water usage by 25%. They hope to avoid deeper mandatory cuts from regulators dealing with the state's drought. A decision could come today. And crews along the coast near Santa Barbara are continuing to work on cleaning up tens of thousands of gallons of crude oil that spilled earlier this week. So far, they've managed to clean up 9,000 gallons, but that's a long ways off from the 105,000 gallons that spilled. The company that runs the pipeline that burst says it may take weeks to figure out exactly what happened. Oh, that's just a mess. That's so heartbreaking to watch what's going on over there. Did you see that sea lion? That
The
was
oil spill?
covered in
Yeah,
oil?
it's always terrible.
Heartbreaking. Well, in other news, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a vocal opponent of the Patriot Act.
But if his opposition is successful, it could leave the nation vulnerable to another 9/11 terror attack. That, according to former CIA Director James Woolsey. Woolsey appearing on Newsmax Prime last night with J.D. Hayworth.
I strongly disagree with Senator Paul. Back in the 40s, or at least in the 1950s, this issue went up to the Supreme Court, whether or not the U.S. government, through the post office, say, could conduct a surveillance of mail letters, just, of course, getting what's on the outside of the envelope, the return address and the postmark. Could they keep a record of your mail because they suspected, without having a warrant, that you might be corresponding with someone who was a criminal or a terrorist or whatever. That went up to the Supreme Court, and the government won. And it has been legal since the 1950s or early 60s for there to be so-called mail surveillance of that sort. Now, what's happened in the years since the 60s is Moore's Law, and we have now, instead of thousands of first-class letters in the mail all the time, we have tens to hundreds of millions of emails and phone calls and so forth. And the NSA was operating under the principles of the Supreme Court decision. They were not getting into, I'm told, the substance of people's emails. They were only keeping a record or phone calls of who they were from and who they were to and what the date was. That would mean that if a known terrorist continues to correspond back and forth by email with you or me, and the government grows suspicious, they could then go to a court and try to obtain a warrant to look at the substance of the email. But they could not do that. They could not look at the substance without a warrant. And Senator Paul and others make it sound as if there's this massive surveillance of the substance of what's in our emails and our telephone conversations by the government, and that's simply not true.
This has been keeping you up at night, hasn't it?
Well, not literally, but talking to J.D. this morning, I mean, Ambassador Woolsey makes a very, as J.D. said, salient argument for why this program needs to still exist, and maybe it does need to evolve to a certain degree.
What, the collection specifically of phone records?
Yes, the NSA surveillance programs, and we don't know, and we will never know to what degree this really plays in our everyday lives, but I can't say it's personally affected my life. You don't know.
I don't know. I think there's that fine line of Big Brother that
I worry that with the so-called NSA trolls are diluting this argument into something that it isn't really. And we may have seen that play out on the Senate floor with Rand Paul. Time will tell. He's offering a filibuster starter pack for sale on social media today to follow up. To see that complete interview, of course, you can also go to Newsmax.com. Let's also talk about this Duggar scandal, Miranda. Big talker here.
There's
a debate.
Shocker.
Yeah, it's a huge shock. There's a debate happening on our Facebook page right now. Here's what some of you are saying. First, Glenda, all families have some kind of skeleton in their closet. This happened when he was a child. Whoever brought this back up years later is money hungry.
Catherine says he was underage. They were underage. He was a minor that made mistakes. People make mistakes.
Nancy writes, though, how could any of you people, God-fearing or not, defend a known child molester? What's his age got to do with it? Come on, shame on you.
Vicky says this was not rape. His family took care of it and took care of Josh. He has grown into a fine man with a beautiful family. Time to let this go. I know other families have had to deal with things like this and worse. God bless Josh and his family.
And Jim says this is a reality show now. You can go to our Facebook page, Facebook /Newsmax, and let your comments know. We're back with more here on Newsmax Now.